Okay, show of hands. How many of you have ever seen Jesus Christ Superstar? Okay. All right, how many of you knew or remembered that come this summer, it will be 10 years since I was in a production of JC Superstar at Sedge Garden United Methodist Church? That's right, 2014.
Scary to think that long ago.
The year of the house fire, which destroyed almost all our possessions and killed our 2 cats. In fact, the fire happened on one of the nights I had off from rehearsals. And I believe Joyce was busy rehearsing Fiddler on the Roof over here in Winston at the Stained Glass Playhouse that night, where she was playing Yenta the Matchmaker. She used to tell what had happened when the guy playing Tevye had come to the line in Fiddler in which he says, somebody ought to have taken a match to this place years ago. Everybody had blanched more or less simultaneously when they realized that he had said this in the presence of a woman who had just lost her home to a fire. Now, Joyce had acted with this guy before in a show for, years before, in a show for Kernersville Little Theater, in which he had managed to alienate the entire cast and the crew somehow. In fact, Joyce used to say that since her character was supposed to give this fellow a stage slap right at the end of the show, that if she didn't actually give him a real slap, that the crew, the rest of the cast and the crew were going to make her wish that she had. Well, to his credit, this guy had learned to behave like a human being toward his castmates somewhere along the way, and he couldn't apologize enough for the line that he had just delivered at that Fiddler rehearsal. He even offered to skip the line entirely in view of the circumstances, but Joyce said no. The line is in the script after all, and it's a perfectly natural reaction on the part of the characters to the fact that they're being driven away from their homes just because they're Jewish. She did allow, though, that her tears were perhaps a bit more real than usual in that scene every time they rehearsed or performed it that summer. And that's the scene where they've just gotten the word from the Russian constable that they're going to have to leave their beloved Anatevka, and the number that they do is essentially a dirge for the death of their community. Meanwhile, like I said, I was in Jesus Christ Superstar that summer. I was playing Herod, and I bet Judith remembers me doing that show. There was one song that used to get me every time. It's called Could We Start Again, Please? And it's where Mary Magdalene and the disciples, other than Judas, of course, especially Peter, are responding to Jesus' arrest. Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice had actually written the song for the Broadway premiere of the show, which is why it isn't on the original concept album, the one with the famous brown cover. You can imagine the lyrics, you can imagine the effect that lyrics like these had on somebody who'd just been rendered homeless. I've been living to see you, dying to see you, but it shouldn't be like this. This was unexpected. What do I do now? Could we start again, please? I've been very hopeful so far. Now for the first time I think we're going wrong. Hurry up and tell me this is just a dream, or could we start again, please? I think you've made your point now. You've even gone a bit too far to get the message home. Before it gets too frightening, we ought to call a halt. So could we start again, please? Such simple lyrics. I'd sing along backstage every performance in order to make the sound richer and more full-bodied, which is fairly common if you're doing community theater. But the tears would roll down my cheeks every time. That feeling of desolation cleared up a mystery for me involving the other God show, as the publicity vice president at Kernersville Little Theater, KLT, once called it. The other God show that came out around the same time as JC Superstar. I'm talking about Godspell, of course, which I saw for the first time during my senior year at Guilford. For those of us who've been North Carolina Quakers long enough to know whom I'm talking about, Billy and Viola Britt's son Byron played, he was in that cast, and he played the piano on one of my favorite songs from that show, Turn Back, Old Man. The next time I saw the show was the KLT production of Godspell that took place in the summer of 1989. Although I wasn't in the cast, I was part of the crew. I ran the follow spot. Any of you know what a follow spot is? Okay. It's the spotlight that can zero in on specific actors and follow them around, and I was on a platform at the back of the house. They didn't have a script to give me when I showed up to start rehearsing the last week with the cast. But what did that matter? I was a religion major. I grew up reading the Bible. I knew those stories. So I just took a legal pad and wrote down what story they were doing next, what my lighting cues were, and what to do for each cue. I have to confess, I did ad-lib one line in that, one action in that performance, but only because I saw that it was necessary that somebody do it, and I saw that whoever did it had to be located pretty much where I was. The second act of Godspell pretty much starts with the Turn Back, O Man number. The actress who sings it, complete with feather boa, of course, starts at the back of the house and vamps her way down the aisle to the stage. Or, if you would rather quote the lyric, "See you later, I'm going to the front of the theater." It's that sort of number, but it's based on an old hymn, which is in our green hymnal, by the way. On preview night, which was also the final dress rehearsal, each member of the cast and crew was able to invite a guest or two to view the performance for free. Now, this gave all of us a chance to see how an audience would react, which is a very useful bit of knowledge for opening night, because you see where an audience might react and what their reaction might be. And you adjust what you do accordingly. Well, and of course, no two audiences ever react exactly alike. Well, I noticed that nobody seemed to know to look in the right direction when the opening riff of Turn Back, O Man started. See, the actress was right beside my platform, and nobody was expecting the next action to come from all the way back there. So I gave a wolf whistle to get people to turn their heads in my direction so that they could see the actress start the song. I used to joke that the difference between the two shows was that Godspell was sort of like Jesus and the Flower Children, while JC Superstar is more like Jesus Joplin and a tailspin. One of my religion professors said that the music in Superstar is better written, and that's true. But the best song in Godspell is On the Willows, which happens in the Last Supper scene. It's beautiful, but it's also heartbreaking. On the willows there we hung up our lives, for our captors there required of us songs, and our tormentors' mirth. On the willows there we hung up our lives, for our captors there required of us songs, and our tormentors' mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. But how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Oh, what puzzled me about that song for the longest time when I first heard it was what it was doing in the Last Supper scene. I knew about the connection of the Last Supper with the Passover meal, of course. And I knew that On the Willows is a setting of Psalm 137, verses 2 to 4. Some of you probably recognized the words too. But I also knew that Psalm 137 isn't sung at the Passover Seder. Psalm 136 is, thank the Lord who is good, for his love endures forever. But not 137. Then I worked the show for Kernersville Little Theater, and things changed. During the crucifixion scene, I saw one of the cast members pleading, "Don't leave us." And then I figured it out. Psalm 137, or On the Willows, is a song of desolation. The song of people who are lost and hurting and afraid. The song of people who'd rather be anywhere else but facing the situation they find themselves in. We all know that feeling. If we don't yet, we will. Now put yourself in the disciples' shoes, in Mary Magdalene's shoes, that morning 2,000 years ago. Someone they love has just been violently ripped away from them, and they'll never see him again. Not only that, but the community that they've begun building among themselves has just been shattered. So what happens now? A few of them go back to his grave just as soon as they're able, so they can at least finish giving him a decent burial, but his body's not there. Now what's happened? Grave robbers? Something even worse? Couldn't they just leave him to rest in peace? Now let's look at one of the most famous resurrection accounts from the Gospel of John. Chapter 20, verses 11 to 18. But Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping, and as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre, and seeth two angels in white sitting, the one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. And they say unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? She saith unto them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him. And when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. She turned herself and saith unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. Jesus saith unto her, Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brethren and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord, and that he had spoken these things unto her. Mary had just had one of the worst days in her life, followed by 2 nights and a day of enforced rest, in which she and anybody else who loved Jesus and had seen what had happened to him on that terrible Friday were free to stew in their own juices. Now it looked like she was about to have another horrible day, and suddenly it was all too much for her. All she could do was just stand there sobbing, until she happened to glance into the borrowed tomb where they'd given Jesus a hasty burial late on Friday afternoon. Then she saw 2 mysterious figures dressed in white robes who kindly asked her what was wrong. After she unburdened herself to them, she turned around again and saw another man whom she thought was the gardener. He asked her what the matter was. And she told him that if he had moved the body, all she wanted to know was where it was so that she could move it somewhere safe. Then the man said her name, and that's when she recognized him as Jesus. Why hadn't Mary recognized Jesus immediately? I suspect the answer is quite simple. Given what Mary had seen on Friday, Jesus was the last person she expected to see again on Sunday morning. She certainly wasn't prepared for an up-close and personal encounter with what you might call the Great Resurrection, the capital R resurrection, that of Jesus. In other words, the first Easter. In an article which appears in the liner notes to that wonderful John Eliot Gardner recording of Handel's Messiah, Nicholas Kenyon writes that in Handel's day, the piece was often performed just before Easter. Quote, the feast which celebrates, as does Messiah, the totality of the Christian faith. But Easter's about more than just the resurrection of Jesus, either on its own or as a guarantor of our own eternal destiny to be with God. Though it's about both of those things too, of course. You may remember that at the Christmas candlelight, I included texts from the New Testament and elsewhere to the effect that we believe in a God who restores all things. This is the gift of the Christ. In the end, the whole of created life will be rescued. In other words, the Christ event is about more than just dealing with human alienation from God, human sin, if you will. It's about restoring the whole of creation. The peaceable kingdom of Isaiah 11 is the mirror image and perfection of the Garden of Eden. Easter works the same way. We all have areas of our lives and times in our lives which need resurrection, often on a daily basis. Susie Best's poem, The Miracle Dreams, which was another of the Christmas candlelight readings, says much the same thing. On the night of Christ's nativity, a blind man, a deaf man, a cripple, a leper, a harlot, and a dead man all have dreams that their condition, whatever it is healed. Or to quote from a post by Mark Sandlin, which Judith shared on her Facebook page just yesterday, For me, what matters is that Easter reminds us that we need resurrection in our lives. Easter should remind us that we are called to live resurrected lives. You see, Easter is not just about Jesus, it's about us. Easter is not about death, it's about life. Easter is not about the past, it's about the future. It is not just the story of a resurrection that happened then. It is about the resurrections that are happening now, every day, every minute, and the constant possibility of them in our lives. Unmarked Boxes, the English language version of a poem by the 13th century Sufi Muslim poet Rumi, sees those daily resurrections this way. Don't grieve. Anything you lose comes round in another form. The child weaned from mother's milk now drinks wine and honey mixed. God's joy moves from unmarked box to unmarked box, from cell to cell. As rainwater down into flower bed, as roses up from ground. Now it looks like a plate of rice and fish. Now a cliff covered with vines. Now a horse being saddled. It hides within these till one day it cracks them open. Part of the self leaves the body when we sleep and changes shape. You might say, last night I was a cypress tree, a small bed of tulips, a field of grapevines. Then the phantasm goes away. You're back in the room. I don't want to make anyone fearful. Hear what's behind what I say. Ta-ta-tum-tum, ta-ta-tum, ta-da-dum. There's the light gold of wheat in the sun, and the gold of bread made from that wheat. I have neither. I'm only talking about them. As a town in the desert looks up at stars on a clear night. Don't you find the notion of God's joy moving around from unmarked box to unmarked box, just waiting for us to discover it, somehow irresistible? The sentiment that we are an Easter people has been attributed to a number of people over the years, the first of whom may actually have been Augustine back at the turn of the 5th century. Augustine's exposition on Psalm 148 contrasts the time before Easter, Lent, with the time after Easter. The former is a time of tribulation, which signifies the time in which we live now. The latter, after Easter, a time of rejoicing, which signifies the glory that awaits us. In other words, we're an Easter people, but we're living in a Good Friday world right now. Those whom we love leave us. The homes we loved are taken from us by accidents like fire or by the malicious designs of others. Or we've been cast out of some other Eden, some demi-paradise, perhaps through no fault of our own. But fear not. Easter is both and, not either or. Jesus' resurrection, along with our own ones in the future, and the small metaphoric resurrections we encounter in our lives all the time, aren't mutually exclusive. In the words of the psalmist, weeping may last for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Amen. I swear.